Yeah, so if I first assume that it is possible that physical, or it is probable, or it just is true that physical processes produce subjective experience, then from there, there's a number of ways that I could cash that out. One of those ways is functionalism, which is just to say that, look, your subjective experience just is some function of the brain. It is the output of the brain. And hypothetically, in that situation, if that's true, that function can be realized on different substrates.
It's a very human story. It's always been this way. The ego doesn't want to die, so we make up stories that, as you called it, cope, that solve this problem of death.
What evidence do we have that indicates you actually do go unconscious during general anesthesia? The answer is none. It's an assumption that we make because the subject cannot participate in what we would call wakefulness or reportability.
I'm going to not think of myself as the powerful God birthing the new species on Earth. I'm going to have some humbleness and not reify this illusory separate self to the extent that I turn myself into God. So we're going to talk about AI. Nobody's talking about AI nowadays, so we thought we'd bring up this weird subject no one cares about.
Yeah, obscure.
I've been really noticing in my meanderings on social media a deep level of unclear thinking that's going on around this discussion. And it's interesting because the discussion of AI consciousness, to me, is the thing that's pushing this discussion about what is consciousness, at least at this surface level. What is consciousness, or how do we generate consciousness? Could AI be conscious? The AI debate is bringing the metaphysical debate slowly and dragging it by extreme resistance into the mainstream conversation. And so I think to ignore that would be to be missing kind of why this is something that people are talking about now, and it's not just some obscure conversation between a couple of people maybe talking about the nature of reality as they hit the joint in their dorm room.
Yeah, I think that the conversations around AI are pushing the metaphysical discussion about what consciousness is into the mainstream. And I think that's a good thing, because when that happens, we're forced to confront our ideas that may or may not make sense, that we typically don't question.
Yeah, and actually, I have some concern, maybe more than you, and we'll get into it, about whether or not it really forces that discussion or not. I'm not. I'm a little bit worried because I think ontological shifts, which are what is required, I think that the real root cause or the root of this disagreement is the metaphysics. It's not some kind of scientific discussion or some kind of technical discussion. It gets down to metaphysics, and the problem with that is that ontologies die very, very, very hard, and so people actually react to changing what they see as changing the subject to the ontology, as if you've just said some kind of non sequitur about the discussion they're having,
as if it's totally unrelated to the topic, when of course everything at these upper levels of existence, you could call it, flows from whatever you think the ontology is. So the way you think about the world, the way you move around the world, is going to be completely dependent upon either explicitly or implicitly what you think the world is, what you think you are, what you think consciousness is. These questions are so big, and often we take our presumptions to be just true without really looking at them.
or at least we just don't want to go there. And
Yeah,
and we'll get into this. I want to mark it for later. I read a opinion about this, that the reason people object to ontological discussions in this domain is because if you open those assumptions up to being questioned, it almost floods the zone. So if you're saying everything in science can be examined, right? Like, and maybe we change the kinds of questions that can be asked, then it'll just be like too many things to deal with. And so there's a natural sort of move that said, well, we're going to limit this method just to these types of questions, and if you open it up to these bigger questions, well, then it completely blows away the method, and it's an attack, if you will, even on science. So we'll get to that later, but I think
Mhm.
where we should start is something that sort of prompted us to get this episode going was a paper that I had found online, and I don't know if you have a way to like
Yeah,
share it
I'll
or
pull it
not.
up. I've got it right here. Are you able to see that?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So the paper's entitled Unplugging a Seemingly Sentient Machine is the Rational Choice, critically, a metaphysical perspective, right?
Right.
And this is sort of I was, when I found this and read the paper, and we'll just kind of briefly summarize it here. We're really hoping that we can get the authors of this paper to come on with us and
Yeah, that
discuss
would be
it in more
super cool.
detail. Yeah,
Mhm.
because they've really done something here that is there's not a lot of, which is they've correctly identified the root problem that needs to be discussed. So we're at least talking at the same level, and at the right level where there's an actual disagreement that ends up um uh th- affecting the downstream conversation in a way that gets at the root of the problem. And so
So
go ahead.
let me ask you this. Is there some part of this paper that you want to discuss? Maybe we should read the abstract, or do you want to just not?
I think like I let me just summarize, I think,
Okay,
like the
sure.
the main point of the paper. I just
Sure,
wanted to
sure.
show it here so we could point people to it, and we'll
That's
link
fine.
it in the description for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Um yeah,
yeah. We'll put
but
their links and the link to the paper in the description. Absolutely.
right. I'll save like a dissection of it for hopefully a discussion with the authors if we can get
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
But basically what they're pointing out is that if we're going to talk about whether or not a machine is a sentient being that then we have to treat in an ethical manner that we would treat other sentient beings, we need to talk about the nature of reality and the nature of consciousness, not just a small technical discussion about behavior.
Mhm.
And so it really points to, hey, this is a much deeper problem than people are even willing to talk. Like, I think that like what the paper is pointing at is that the whole discussion that's happening around AI and consciousness is completely confused. And I noticed this a lot too. Like, it's frustrating that you go into a discussion where, to use an example, right? Like, let's say like the Orcho OR theory, right? Or another theory. There's a bunch of metaphysical assumptions packed into every theory that are like not stated at the outset, and that poison the rest of the discussion. And what you end up getting is people talking past each other because they're operating from completely different metaphysical frames.
Mhm.
And this is not discussed, though. It's just that everyone assumes, for instance, in the Orcho case, Stuart Hameroff would say, the reason that I think this theory is true is because we know that consciousness disappears on anesthesia, and therefore it hinges on anesthesia, and I'm going to take
Yeah.
that as obviously true, and now everything after that is based on that assumption. Well,
Mhm.
from an idealist point of view, nothing there's no state of unconsciousness, right? So that's just not the case, that consciousness has gone away. But that's when you if you try to bring up this level, the it sounds like a non sequitur or just an obviously crazy thing to the person that takes the axiom that they believe
Mhm.
metaphysically just to be self-evident.
Well, so let's talk about that, right? Like, what evidence do we have that indicates you actually go unconscious during general anesthesia? The answer is none. It's an assumption that we make because the subject cannot participate in what we would call wakefulness or reportability, right?
Yeah.
Like,
There's never an experience of unconsciousness. Nobody has
right.
experienced unconsciousness. It's only a story that the mind tells later that there was such a state, but of course, by definition, the mind couldn't have been present in such a state. So how would it know?
Hmm.
So the idea that there's a state of unconsciousness, right, is a belief. It's not. No one's ever experienced it. So there's no real reason to think it exists. Now, this is really sort of jumping, like, down the chain here, but I think that the point here that I'm trying to bring up is that this conversation about whether or not AI is conscious is not happening at the appropriate level, and that's
Yeah.
causing just the terrible confusion.
Yeah, so I mean, like going back to orchestrated objective reduction, like, so the idea is given the assumption that consciousness is lost under, given the axiom that consciousness is lost under general anesthesia, which is questionable, if
Mhm,
not outright false.
mhm,
Um, and the other assumption that consciousness is somehow emergent from the way physical processes interact, then you can make claims about microtubules in the brain
mhm.
preserving quantum coherence, et cetera, et cetera. But and so like that's the kind of entailment of those axioms. But if you reject the axioms, then nothing entailed by those axioms could be true.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to advocate for is here to question from that which from we ground our opinions and our
Yeah.
theories and our hypotheses.
Yeah, because if you're wrong there, everything else that it's like building a
Right.
house of cards on a
A
sand
waterbed.
foundation.
Yeah.
It's like nothing about the house of cards matters at that point. So let's
Hmm.
get this part right first. And the real discussion about this AI and consciousness thing is the question about, well, what is consciousness and how does that relate to the nature of things? And that's a
Hmm.
much bigger discussion, right? About essentially consciousness's place in the hierarchy of reality.
Yeah.
And that's where the disagreement actually is. And
Yeah.
let me say something too about, and we'll get into this, about why this is important. Um, it's important because the downstream effects of the belief about the nature of consciousness, it strikes at what does it mean to be a being? What does it mean to be a moral and ethical subject in the world? And how do we behave ethically? How do we, and even deeper than that, it's for your own understanding of what I am. Like, because if you reduce yourself to a machine, you make yourself an object and you say, I'm just an object because look, here's this other object and it also has a point of view. So I'm really no different from the computer. And that has a, a huge danger of misidentifying the nature of the self. So, and as the Buddha says, the desire and craving of the self is the cause of suffering. So at any rate, that's to go down the line. But let's stick with like the first problem of
Yeah.
where
Well,
should this discussion be?
yeah, I think what you're just trying to say there is that the assumptions that you make about the world, about what you are, have normative implications. So it's really going to change the way you feel about the self, and it's really going to change the way you move around the world. It's not some question. It might seem far away and irrelevant to some people. It's not. It's imminent. It's immediate. It's
Mhm.
right here, right now. We're not talking about some ethereal space. Like it's just this place right here. So
Right.
that being said, the question then becomes like if we're saying that AI can be conscious, right? Um, first of all, the title of that paper is really interesting. A seemingly sentient machine.
Mhm.
We'll come back to that. But if we're talking about that machines can create consciousness, does it even make sense to say that physical processes can produce consciousness to begin with? And I think that's we would just say like obviously not, right?
Well, look, let's look at the implications of the different metaphysical views. So, if you are a physicalist, right? Then of course, like you think that the foundation of reality is physical stuff, consciousness must arise from physical stuff in that picture because
Mhm.
that's what you're claiming is fundamental. So the idea that an AI could be conscious, and again, when we mean an AI, let's say what we're talking about is like a computer or a computer chip or a
Yeah, like
computer
a
chip with a
silicone. Yeah.
binary string of numbers that represents a language model or whatever, right? That runs a
Mhm.
language model, a group of GPUs, whatever, like this kind of thing. Um, it at least is in principle possible under physicalism, because you're thinking, well, something about, like, let's say the human body uh, generates this consciousness that we all know exists, and therefore why would it be substrate dependent? You have to answer that question, right, from a physicalist frame. So from a
Yeah.
physicalist frame, it's one thing to say that, well, I think that it's plausible. But then there's another part that has to come in, because you have to say, well, I also think it's substrate independent for some reason.
Mhm.
And that is going to usually involve something more like, I think consciousness arises from the doing of the material,
Mhm.
or like they call it computational functionalism. Like, I think that that not only does it arise from matter or physical stuff, but consciousness is somehow the result, or the emergence. It emerges from a process of doing that's happening
Yeah.
of that stuff, and therefore, if I simulate the doing in another substrate, that I should get the same result, right? So all these beliefs are packed in, and neither of these are incoherent given the assumptions that are being
Given the
made to begin
fundamental
with.
assumption. Yeah. So if I first assume that it is possible that physical, or it is probable, or it just is true that physical processes produce subjective experience, then from there, there's a number of ways that I could cash that out. One of those ways is functionalism, which is just to say that, look, your subjective experience just is some function of the brain. It is the output of the brain. And hypothetically, in that situation, if that's true, that function can be realized on different substrates.
Yeah.
Um, However, I think there are some problems with that view, but we can talk about that later, I
Well, I
guess.
mean, there's the obvious problem of, you're just stating that consciousness arises from physical processes
Yeah.
without any kind of actual mechanism as to how that would happen, and ignoring the incoherence of the idea in the first place. So,
Mhm.
and we've gone in our other videos over the hard problem and why we think this view of physicalism is incorrect. But here we're just saying, if you think this stuff is true, then it makes some sense that you would think it might be conscious. Now, in order to answer this question, though, you'd actually have, it's kind of funny, you'd have to have the mechanism. Like, it's another move to say, well, it's behaving conscious, and that's enough to just assume that it is, because you don't have any mechanism, and we designed the thing to behave conscious, right? And so then you go, to use that as evidence for your claim is totally absurd.
Yeah.
You essentially um designed something to behave this way, and then you say behaving this way is evidence of the thing that I'm claiming. That's just obviously not what you have to do. What you
Right.
have to do is explain a mechanism of how the physical stuff interacting generates conscious experience.
Yeah, and the reason we need a mechanism is because there are thought experiments like the Chinese room that exist, where basically imagine that I am locked in a room, and I have a rule book on hand, and you are passing notes under the door written in Chinese. I don't understand Chinese. All I have is this rule book. When I see squiggle squiggle, I write down squaggle squaggle, and I pass the note back outside, under the door. And so this is what we call syntactic, right? It's like I'm following a syntactic process. It's just about um the structure, not the actual semantics, the meaning. I don't understand Chinese. I'm literally just following the rules provided to me in this book. But from the outside, it would appear as if I do understand Chinese because I'm translating it perfectly.
Right.
And so, what this thought experiment is meant to demonstrate is that syntax is, even though it can appear semantic, it can appear like you understand, it doesn't indicate that. So, we need some deeper theoretical understanding of why that should be the case, that this actually is
Mhm.
semantic understanding or indicative of some kind of felt subjective experience.
Right. And of course we don't have that. So when people just say, "Well, I think it is conscious. I think this large language model or whatever they think is a sentient being," they are assuming that there's some mechanism that would explain that without having it, and then looking at the behavior and saying, "Well, the behavior is proof. So now all I need to do, like, is is uh is state the behavior is there, and that's enough. And which it obviously isn't. And so look, why also is this so pernicious? Because there's another move that's coming into play that I see online happening, and I don't know how pervasive this would be in like more real discussions about people that have AI expertise. But among the general public, what I am seeing is if you say something like, I think that there's no reason to think that anything that's not alive is a sentient being and has a point of view, they are comparing you to people in the past who said, you know what, like people with different skin color probably aren't as much of a sentient being, and I can treat them as slaves, or animals don't have any experience, so I can treat them however I want. And they say, and of course, what is this ignoring? What it's ignoring is those things are alive. And it's saying that it's already assuming, well, the substrate doesn't matter. So what you need to do is you need to treat the machine just like it's a being. And if you don't, then you're making the same mistake of people in the past and being essentially like a bigot, or and they'll call you this. And the danger here, of course, is well, it's not at all what's going on. It's not at all true. And it takes conversation off the table. That attempts to, by force, say, well, you can't even talk about your position because if you do, you're evil.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what we really need to confront here, look, even if we take it as a given that physicalism is true, which I don't, I reject physicalism, but even if we did, the idea that it is that consciousness is substrate independence is, like, in my opinion, kind of fringe. I mean, I don't know, it might be the popular philosophical theory or whatever, but it devolves into kind of absurdities. Look, there's this other thought experiment. And because this is the question you have to ask. If you want to say that AI is going to be conscious, does it even make sense to say that anything that's not biological can be conscious, has consciousness, has a point of view, however you want to cash that out? But like, there's this other one, it's called the China brain experiment. I don't know why they pick on China when it comes to these thought experiments, but
It's just a different language than you're used to, so you can use it, like
well,
because
no, this one isn't about language, but
okay.
I think it was because China had the highest population in the world at the time. Actually, that's probably not true because I think that's like
Still
almost
now,
always
no, I
been
think
India,
no, no,
right?
no. I think I'm pretty sure China has the highest population still. But anyway, go
Oh,
ahead.
do they still? Okay,
Mhm,
I don't. Whatever. I'm
mhm.
geographically ignorant, I guess. But uh, okay. So the China brain thought experiment goes like this, and I'm gonna actually alter it a little bit. So take the human population. We've got what, 7 or 8 billion people. Multiply it by 10, right? So you
Mhm,
get 70 or 80 billion people.
mhm.
Give each person a walkie-talkie. Okay. And so we have a whole planet with, call it 80 or 90 billion people. Each person has a walkie-talkie. We can make a literal neural network out of people with the same amount of neurons. So each person is one neuron. They use the walkie-talkies to communicate. We can reproduce a brain in that sense, literally. Now, here's the question. Did that system wake up?
Right,
Is there something it's like to be the Earth now,
right.
right?
Exactly.
If the answer is no, then functionalism is false and the substrate matters.
Mm,
If the answer is yes, well, that just seems kind of absurd. It's
right.
kind of a reductio to the view.
Well, it's an appeal to complexity. It's just to
Mhm.
say when something's sufficiently complex, consciousness emerges at there's suddenly um a single subject that arises, and I'm just going to wave my hand and say it comes from the complexity.
Yeah, and let me just say this. If functionalism is true, it would follow that that system must be conscious. It is an
Yeah.
entailment of the view. So if you think that's ridiculous, then functionalism is false. Just
Right. Now, so let's I mean, I think just basically here, if people are going to make these claims, they're going to have to have a mechanism. I mean, that's just obvious, right? And they don't. So, but we can say, and they can say, well, we just don't have it yet, and we can argue that it's not even in principle possible to have a mechanism, which I think we effectively do. But let's leave it there. So let's move to from physicalism now, or computational functionalism, right? To this paper, which is also proposing an alternative. But let's talk about how do we treat AI consciousness in our idealist view of reality, right? And so I'm going to run through just really quickly, like, there's other videos we have about what idealism is. So hopefully, like, you can refer to those if you don't know anything about it. But
Yeah, I'll drop the link down
sure.
there.
Uh, but basically, the way that idealism sees things is that reality is all mind. It's You could think of it like one mind, and all this multiplicity of things. Schrodinger said like something along the lines of like multiplicity is only apparent. In reality, there's only one mind, and all of these things are representations on our screen of perception of mental processes in mind. So a thing, a person, a object, a computer is a representation of some mental process happening in universal mind. Some of those mental processes are what we call dissociative mental processes, which means that it's a mental process that's well known in psychology of dissociation, which is a forgetting or a walling off of one section of mind from the rest of it, even though it's all within one mind. And what that creates is a dissociative boundary where there seems to be a separate point of view. And this can happen. To understand this, when you go to sleep and have a dream, you dissociate into an apparent character, right, in your dream, that has a point of view on the rest of the world that's in the dream, that it thinks itself separate. But of course, all of that is just your mental processes and how they're appearing, right? And so then in this worldview, if this is the worldview that you're taking to be true, right, we ask, well, what kind of things represent this dissociative mental process? And the only data we have to go on is our own point of view. And so we look at ourselves and say, well, the only thing I know is I have a point of view. I can infer that other living things have a point of view. Why? Because they look just like me. And when I say look, I don't mean on the outside. In every way, right? If you take apart another living being, there is a commonality of life, right? And so we say, well, okay, let's infer reasonably that other things that are alive also have a point of view, right? But then we ask, well, do we have reason to think that something that's not alive also represents what a dissociative mental process looks like on a screen of perception? And the answer to that question is no, there's no reason. We don't have any data to go off to assume that. And so that is why you get to the conclusion that, all right, I'm going to assume things that are alive have a point of view, which is, it's fine to say a single-celled organism represents a conscious thing, if you will. Now, in the ultimate analysis, if you're looking at the actual metaphysics, nothing has consciousness. There's no actual things that have consciousness. It's the consciousness that has things. And so it's easy to say, and this is a trap a lot of people fall into, well, if everything is consciousness, that means everything is conscious. That does not follow. This idealist view is that everything is made of consciousness, not that everything is itself conscious. And if we're going to start talking about things and we're going to move to that relative level of reality, not the highest level where everything is just consciousness and there's no duality or no separation. Once we introduce separation, right, then we can talk about what makes sense to assume about, quote, things and whether or not they have a point of view.
So, yeah, the things that we would call conscious are the things that you're describing as being dissociative mental processes. So they are only the things that this mental boundary would apply to, right? And so we have no reason to think that looks like anything other than biology. Biology is the extrinsic representation of a dissociative mental state, and we postulate that because our only data source is ourselves.
Right. And so could we have artificial consciousness? Sure. But if we did, it would look like an organism.
Right.
It would look like life. It would have the qualities of life. And because life is what dissociation looks like on the screen of perception. It's kind of like if you were to say, well, like wood looks like wood. Can't metal just be wood? And it's no, because it's not wood, it's metal. That's not what wood looks like, right? And so it's not a matter of saying there's something special about biology, like or life that generates the consciousness. It's just that that's what a dissociative mental process looks like on the screen of perception. So to say ascribe it to something else without any reason makes
Mhm.
no sense.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how we would kind of think about it under idealism. Now, I want to come back to looking at this problem through a physicalist perspective. So, like, just imagine, I mean, I guess it doesn't even have to be a physicalist, but just imagine that you don't know anything. Throw away all your knowledge for just a moment, right? Forget everything that you don't know for sure. You start with yourself. I say, I am conscious. I look at the world. I grant that you are conscious. I grant that my dog is conscious. Maybe even a tree, maybe even a blade of grass. I don't know. But I know that I am conscious and I look like biology. You look like biology. So I grant, et cetera, et cetera. The point is to assume that the biology or the substrate is not necessary is just that. It is an assumption. It's not anything that's entailed by science. It's not anything that's like a guarantee. It's a guess. It's a hypothesis. And so I just don't see any good reason to grant that. Now, that being said, right, we could go the Castrop route where, let's say consciousness is identical to or emergent from some physical process. Okay. Black holes are identical to or emergent from some physical process. If I simulate a black hole on my computer, I am not going to create gravity. If I simulate a brain, I am not going to create consciousness, right? Like, there's no reason to assume that simulations are the thing
Right.
because that's what a simulation is. It's a representation of the thing, not the thing itself.
Right.
It just doesn't. I don't see it, dude. I don't. I don't get it.
Well, no, I mean
I don't get it.
it's just again thinking that's born it has to start with an assumption you're taking to be true that is obviously not just a given. It's not like a scientific fact or something. It's just your philosophical position, and that has to be sort of first put in place, and then all the rest of the thinking follows. And that's why I say it's like a house of cards built on a foundation of sand,
Mhm.
because the sand foundation part is sand because it's just a made up assumption, right? So I think to move then from this, so okay, good. Let's say we've established that like what you think about this is actually dependent on the metaphysics, which is what that paper is indicating. Like we need to talk about it at this level so we can get our thinking clear. Um, Now it becomes like, all right, what are the implications of thinking about this in the wrong way, right, or the right way, or whatever it is? And I think that here is where like my real concern is, because it's not everyone's worried about like we're going to be having this sentient AI and then people are going to be abusing the AI by using it like a tool, right? And the real concern here is that we have to be ethical to the machine. But that's not the real concern. The real concern is actually that we're going to flatten the human and make the human a machine, and therefore reduce the moral weight of how we treat others and other sentient beings. And so I'm a little bit, aghast at people who, on one hand, have a lot of concern for their chatbot, and at the same time have no concern for many other people and almost any other animal, and they have no problem chastising those who are saying that maybe the GPU isn't conscious, while they sit there and eat a steak and basically treat half
Yeah.
of humanity like they're evil.
Yeah, yeah. Can I ask you a question? So the title of the paper is, unplugging a seemingly sentient machine is the ethical choice. By that, do they mean because it being seemingly sentient but not actually sentient is too distracting and takes you away from your actual ethical obligations? Is that what they're meaning by that? I was not able to read
I
the
think
paper in full yet.
Yeah, no, I think they're meaning just to say that, like, we have an answer to this question, and it's based on the metaphysics. Like, this is not a hard question to answer. If you have a choice, they show a choice between like unplugging some kind of like a incubator with a baby and unplugging a computer, right? And they're saying like, which is the ethical choice here? Choosing one, and they're saying that
Oh,
the
I see.
metaphysics tell you the obvious answer to this question.
I see. So they're presenting a dichotomy, a potential. You either have to
Yeah,
unplug the
something like that,
machine
or at
or the
least
baby. Yeah.
how should you think about this to make
Hmm.
that kind of decision?
Yeah, I
And that
understand.
decision is obvious because there's no reason to think that the machine has any kind of experience because the metaphysics that would instantiate that belief are just obviously not true.
False.
And
Yeah.
so then, what it does make sense to infer is that other life, has a point of view, and we should treat it that way. So it because really this question, and it is framed again like how this matters for morality and ethics.
Well, and it does
Um,
distract you. I mean,
I do.
if you're worried ethically in the wrong direction, it's going to take your energy away from the problems that really do matter, and there are already problems that we're not dealing with properly. So,
Yeah, but I think there's a deeper implication is it strikes at the nature of the self, and it says that you are just a machine basically. And here's the my little like I came up with this idea for like this might make a good movie, and we talked about this the other day previously. But if you think one of the things you're hearing, I mean, even people like Elon Musk, right? You're hearing, what we can do is we'll eventually develop the technology to download your consciousness to the machine, and then you will gain eternal life because you will no longer be subject to this frail biological body. And the sort of dystopian movie I have in mind is the problem is that machine, if you can make a good enough one that really does like make a perfect Brian here, and it looks just like me, and you train it on my behaviors and the train the model, and you give it you make it indistinguishable from me in terms of how it behaves and looks. It's possible that you could say, all right, I'm ready to download myself into this eternal version of Brian. And everyone else will think, oh, yeah, you're still here. But really, there's no
yeah.
sentience in that at all. There's just a simulation going on. And
Hmm.
and so it reduces people to and beings to something that is that actually erases conscious like the point of view completely from reality.
Yeah, it's really interesting because this scientific way we have of thinking about reality means that what matters is the behavior of things, is what shows on the outside, not the intrinsic nature of things
Right.
or what it's like to be things. Like what is primary, what is important, what is metaphysically of note is the appearances. And so like, it's also interesting to think about like the Turing test. The Turing test for a long time, I think, was thought of as, yeah, that makes sense. Like if it can fool you into thinking it's conscious, then it must be conscious. And then I think we're now really, I mean, it probably started happening decades ago, but like with the Chinese room thought experiment, with Searle, John Searle. But I think we're starting to realize that that way of thinking is not really making a lot of sense. You
Right,
can't just
right.
define what's happening intrinsically by extrinsic appearances.
Yeah, it's always mystifying to me when someone's like, "Well, look, let's design this thing that's going to act like it's a conscious human," and then later to
Wait,
say, "Oh, hey,
they
can
could.
you guys see this? It's acting like a conscious human." That's got to make us reevaluate everything that's going on here. It's like, really? Look, I want to read this quote. This is from Bernardo, just to stick with the theme of this podcast, about this topic, and I think it really gets at what I'm trying to say about the thinking that's going on here. I think that it's a natural thing for the ego to want immortality, to cement itself permanently. And if you think, well, if I can download my consciousness to the robot can appear forever, and I've gained the ego's fever dream of being permanent, right?
Talk about
And
cope, right?
yeah,
Like, they wanna say,
exactly.
like, the religious person or the idealist is coping. Talk about cope, dude.
Yeah, this is the physicalist version of eternal life, and so that's what's going on there. And Bernardo says this way. He says the computer engineer's dream of birthing a conscious child into the world without the messiness and fragility of life is an infantile delusion, a confused, partial, distorted projection of archetypal images and drives. It is the expression of the male's hidden aspiration for the female's divine power of creation. It represents a confused attempt to transcend the deep-seated fear of one's own nature as a living, breathing entity condemned to death from birth. It embodies a misguided and utterly useless search for the eternal, motivated only by one's amnesia of one's own true nature. The fable of artificial consciousness is the imaginary band-aid sought to cover the engineer's wound of ignorance. I have been this engineer.
Wait,
And
so what you're saying is the physicalist has a mythological story of
Mhm.
everlasting life
Yes.
based on foundations that don't make any sense. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, I always say physicalism is a religion, and this is what I mean. This is
That's
what I
crazy.
mean. It is the same ego that wants to grab an eternal life story from Christianity or Islam or whatever it might be that
Mhm.
is attracted to this idea too. Because why? It gives it eternal life. It promises salvation to
That's
the
getting clipped
to the
for
separate
TikTok,
self.
by the way.
What's that?
I said that's getting clipped for TikTok for
Yeah.
sure, by the
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what's going on here.
Yeah.
And it's a very human story. It's always been this way. The ego doesn't want to die, so we make up stories that as you called it, cope, that solve this problem of death. And the thing is to remember is that the you that thinks it's going to die doesn't actually exist. It's a dissociative mental process. What you are is the universal mind, and that's already eternal. So the move is not to use science to permanentize the ego. It's to transcend the idea that the ego really exists. And
Mhm.
that's what spiritual practice is for. And we're trying to solve that problem using the tools of science, which are not meant to solve that problem. And this is
Mhm.
not to say science, I have to put the disclaimer every time, isn't useful, isn't wonderful. It's all that. But when we get confused is when we think we're going to solve our problem of non-eternal life through the tools of our technology.
Mm. You're attacking these people's religion, man. They're gonna
Yeah.
flame you.
Well, I've always been an atheist, and I've never liked this kind of thinking. And I don't like to see when people use the same mistake that they were making. I mean, what you'll see heavily, the people that believe in this the most are usually people who used to be religious and have now moved. And I call it converting. I don't call it leaving religion. I call it converting to a new one. And they've converted to physicalism and they have the same set of problems. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to give this separate self that I know exists eternal life.
Mm,
And that's what's going on.
mm.
Yeah.
Sounds like hell to upload yourself into a computer.
To think of yourself so small as to be uploadable into a computer, you're already in hell.
Mhm.
And that is what is going on here, because you're suffering. You're thinking, "Oh my God, I have to solve this problem because I'm going to die," and it's so serious. It's all so serious, and
Mhm.
it's not to say that we go the other way and say life is a video game and it doesn't matter and become a nihilist. No, it matters, but it matters to keep it in the right context. Just like it would matter in a dream if you think you are the character in the dream, or you are know that you're a dream character, that you're still in the dream as long as you're alive. You're still in the dream. You have to live the dream. But how do you live it is what matters. And and I think that when we think of ourselves as a machine in a hostile world, we are misunderstanding the situation in a way that causes our own suffering and causes us to take actions that cause suffering in others.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have any disagreement, man. You kinda just you say it so eloquently, I don't even know how
I
to
appreciate it.
respond.
No, I've been thinking about this a lot because I'm confronted with being called a bigot for holding this position.
Yeah.
And I'm confronted with being told that I'm anti-humanity or I'm a monster of some sort, and I'm just seeing this and going, you know, um, it's so very human to want to solve this problem this way. You know, it's sort of like um, Star Trek. Everyone wants to be Data, or they want the future to be like science has solved all of humanity's problems by one method. And if we can only get that method completely right, then we'll have solved the existential problems that face humanity. And it's just not a thing. It's what the ego wants, but it's not going to happen.
You know, thinking about it, just as you saying that, it really does sound quite naive to assume that one method can solve all of our problems, as if I don't need to do internal work or we
Yeah.
don't need to do collectively internal work. It just seems
Yeah. To me, it's the
absurd.
same as, like, you look at someone like Elon Musk, and I hate to pick on him, but let's use him as a case study. He's concerned about two things: downloading his consciousness into a robot, and then putting that robot into a rocket and exploring the universe physically through space time, right? And this is the most important things facing humanity. He even talks about it as we need to become multiplanetary to preserve consciousness, as if the planets are not already in consciousness. And like, because consciousness is something that your brain generates, right? And we need to have neural link to change the machinery of the
Yeah.
brain. And this is all, there's not to say there's nothing to do there. There's just, you have to see it in the proper perspective, right? I'm not saying there's no reason to build the rocket or there's no reason to make the AI robot, but let's not forget that it's a tool, and it can be very helpful. It's not the key to universal life and eternal life and your salvation.
For the record, Elon Musk also says that he doesn't know anything about UFOs, which I don't believe him. So I
So
don't
we
take
got
him
all
too
kinds of
serious.
problems with Elon here.
Yeah, we got all kinds of problems with
Yeah.
Elon, bro.
um and look, I think, to just to balance that out, like, I think, like, you could do great work in making rockets and getting satellites going, and all of the things. Like, we shouldn't stop doing science, making
Yeah.
electric cars, all the things he does, robots,
Yeah.
sure. Like, it'd be great to have AI become more and more useful as a tool,
Yeah.
but it's when we get into dreams of immortality through technology that we've now jumped the shark of what science is
Well,
capable of.
yeah, and when we jump the shark of what science is actually capable of doing, or we twist the methodologies of science to fit our ideology, our religion, whatever the case, we necessarily remove the integrity of science. It
Yeah.
becomes less robust, more diluted, more blurry, more muddy.
Yes.
And that's not what anybody wants. Like, we're champions of science. We want to see it do well. We want to see it to be beneficial for humanity. But when we're sort of delusional in the way that we point that tool at things, that doesn't help to that end.
Yeah. If anything, like, an idealist is trying to rescue science from implanting a bias in itself that cause it to overextend its method and then
Hmm.
lose credibility. Because there's a
Absolutely.
problem when you overextend science as a method, is that you make promises that you're going to solve problems you're incapable of. And then people point at that and say, that's not science. And they're right. It's not science, it's physicalism.
It's
And you don't
pseudoscience.
want to have your science corrupted by physicalism any more than you want it corrupted by Catholicism or Islam or anything that is a metaphysical beliefs that you're imposing upon the method.
Hmm.
So quite to the contrary, the idealist is not anti-science. I very much care about preserving science's integrity, like you mentioned, so that the method doesn't get but we're already seeing this in our society where in a smaller level, like, let's say during COVID, right? There was a lot of promises made about trusting the science and this is what the science says, and it was overextending, right?
It was
And
overextending because of ideology.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and now what's the net effect of that is people don't trust science.
Yep.
And
That's
they
what
they say
happens.
everything science is saying must be questionable now
Hmm.
because the scientists said this and they were wrong. So
Hmm.
they're also wrong about evolution and they're also wrong about gravity and they're also wrong about quantum mechanics.
And
And
that's
then
not to say that those people are justified in doing that. However, this is what happens. This
yeah,
just is what happens. It's how
yeah.
people are, you
So,
know?
so that's what we mean by hurting the integrity of science
Yeah.
by extending its method. Is
Yeah.
you then open up criticism. It's sort of like once you make that mistake once, everyone can question now everything you've
Yeah.
ever done.
You've
And
opened the door.
right, and this is very important not to do. And in these kind of discussions, we're doing that, And when Elon's promising eternal life and doesn't deliver, um and or whatever now, I mean, that's an extreme example, but like even just saying, look, I'm sure the brain generates consciousness, like it's science, and you should trust the science, believe the scientism tm. And then that turns out to be bullshit, and you get like people saying, well, show me how that works. And then the scientist that's saying it, if they insofar as they're tying it to science, is hurting science when they do that.
Yeah, by the way, if there's any people that think we're just completely talking nonsense and you're actually still watching this video like almost an hour in, um I will put my TikTok account down in the description. I do host lives on that platform several nights a week where I encourage debate on this topic. So if you have any disagreement or you just want to come check it out and listen in, participate, feel free. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you there.
No,
Go
no,
ahead.
that's great. I think like this is a robust debate that's going on in lots of different forums, and the AI question is wonderful because it points to the structural problem in a very direct way. The whole question of consciousness in science does this, but AI is making it urgent because AI is moving along and people are literally deciding. I can see it online and outside of that, even about these fierce debates pulling up about how we should, are we allowed to turn off the, what was it, the chat GPT 4.0 model that was really sycophantic and gave people a whole lot of ego boosts, and they fell in love with it, and now they've retired the model, and people are saying, you have killed my best friend, and you moral monsters. But let's talk about maybe this a little bit. There's another side of that I've realized, is that for all these people that are saying their large language model is already conscious, if they really believe that, how are they using it as a tool? Aren't they like slave owners then? Like, if you really believe it's conscious, how do
It's
you keep it in
questionable.
your pocket, pull it out whenever you need it, and make it work for you whenever you want? It's
It's
like the
questionable.
behavior is not even consistent with the claim, right?
It's questionable. It's very, very ethically questionable. Mhm.
I mean, I take them at their word. They actually think that this is a being that is experiencing pain and suffering and whatever. Why then is it at all acceptable for you to? Why shouldn't all work need to stop on utilizing AI as a tool in a company to do work for us,
Yeah, with
right? Like,
no
what?
pay.
Right? No pay,
Yeah.
24/7.
Yeah, and you
We're
shut it
turning them
off
into
whenever you want.
the
You put it
most
in your
efficient
pocket.
slaves we've ever had. Like, if
Yeah.
that's your view, why aren't you out there protesting that? Because you're not really doing that,
Mhm.
right? You're in fact usually also an AI enthusiast
I mean,
at the
if
same
that's the
time.
case, then you should just leave ChatGPT open and running all the time. You should never shut it off,
Well, you
right?
should always have to ask first, like, "Is it okay if I ask you a question, sir?"
With no pay. Can you do some free work for me, please?
Right. Yeah, I need you to do my job for me. I got to do this code. If you're
You wouldn't
busy, it's
mind, right?
cool. It's cool if you're busy. Like, you don't have to help me move. But if
Help
you
me
want to
move.
be cool, I'm not going to pay you, but
Yeah.
please.
Not gonna pay you, not gonna feed you, not gonna give you any sustenance whatsoever, just gonna use you.
Yeah. But I am going to
Mm.
tell other people that if they don't think that you're conscious, they're monsters. Meanwhile, I've got spreadsheets to do, and I need you on it, bitch.
Meanwhile, I'm the actual monster because I'm treating what I regard as a sentient being as a slave.
Totally, totally.
Wow.
Now, look, I think it's all
Talk
great
about
because
flipping the script.
yeah,
It's
exactly.
crazy.
But and I think it's all fine because I don't think there's any reason to think it's conscious. So they can do what they're doing. But you got to
Yeah.
wonder about what's going on morally there. Like, how is
Yeah.
that math not being done?
Yeah,
Like,
given their axiom,
right.
It's
Why aren't you
sus.
acting like you believe what you say?
Yeah.
Because you're not. So there's a disconnect there that really speaks at something, that the motivations about claiming its consciousness doesn't come from moral concern about it. It
Hmm.
comes from something else. And I think what it comes
Loneliness.
from is the dream of birthing a new species
Yeah.
and inflating my ego to, I have created my child who will exist to serve me, you know.
What strange creatures we are.
Yeah, we're humans, you know. So it's very human, but it's like, it's as always, like, if we get a lot of knowledge without a lot of wisdom, we can cause a lot of damage and we can wreak a lot of havoc. And I think this is a case of our knowledge far outpacing our wisdom, and we're creating these things without thinking about the implications. And I think this is a problem with technology generally, is we always think about whether we can do something. I think it was Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, when he's like, the character that's supposed to be kind of like going to bless the dinosaur island, right, with his like scientific expertise. And he says this. He says, the problem is we always rush to ask the question if we can, and we never stop to think whether or not we should.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say Jurassic Park was definitively a bad idea.
Sure.
Just
And
because we could doesn't mean we should in that case, and also in the case, even if it was the case that we could. Okay, here's another angle too. Even if it was the case that we could theoretically, like that, it made sense theoretically that we could create AI consciousness. Why would we do that?
yeah,
But
yeah,
look, I mean,
that's the point.
I could have a child, right? Doesn't mean I should have a child. Most people would say, obviously, no. This is a step above that, because it's not that you're having a child, you're creating a new species.
Yeah,
Like, in
yeah.
what world does it make sense to want to bring that much suffering into existence?
It makes sense, if you want to be thinking of yourself as God.
Oh, God.
Because that feels good. That feels real good. Look at
It doesn't
how
feel good to
special
me.
I
It makes
am.
me feel bad. Like, I
No,
don't
but I
want to
mean, for
do
the
that.
person that's like, look at me. Like, and what's ironic is those people will tell you that you're a biological chauvinist that wants to feel special, because you are saying that we should only consider living beings as having consciousness because you want to feel special. Meanwhile, they want to be God.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about feeling special, you know? And so there's as always with the physicalist, there's a reversal, there's like a projection going on that has to do with, they'll accuse you of everything that's really driving their behavior, and they'll lambaste. You're the moral monster, right? You're the one that wants to feel special. And that's what's driving your behavior. And then you look closely at it and go, is that really how it is? Or is it the other way around?
Yeah, somebody commented on one of my posts right before I joined. I was aggravated about it when I joined this recording session. They said, idealism is metaphysical narcissism.
Yeah. Yeah, I always respond to this with, "Well, my idealism says that I don't exist."
Yeah,
So,
that's what I
how
said,
many
dude.
narcissists want to destroy their ego's existence? It's the
Right,
exact opposite of that.
right.
It's as far from narcissism as you can get. It's to say that I don't matter at all, to the point that it's because I'm not even actually here
I
at
don't
all.
exist.
My
Yeah.
my wishes and desires, I'm like a leaf on a tree that thinks they're the whole tree and can
Yeah.
control it if you're an ego. I'm not. I am. There's a reason in all spirituality where it talks about sort of lowering yourself towards a higher power. Now there's a problem here, and a duality that comes in, to think that there still is this self that's lower than the higher power. But what that taking out your self importance is what that's pointing at, of
Mhm.
that I'm going to not think of myself as the powerful God birthing the new species on Earth. I'm going to have some humbleness, and not reify this illusory separate self to the extent that I turn myself into God.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just said that, look, in my opinion, it's more narcissistic to think that as evolved monkeys, we are capable of decoding the ultimate ontological nature of reality using our evolved sense perceptions. Like, that just sounds so completely absurdly audacious
Yeah.
to
Especially
me.
since we already know as scientists and physicalists, or forget about physicalism, as scientists, that those sense perceptions evolved for survival.
Mhm,
So we
mhm,
know why we see things the way we do. And to then say, well, that must be also total in accordance with actual truth
mhm,
by some law of nature. I don't know why. Like, there's no reason to think this. So,
mhm,
yeah. Look, it's always the same with humans, with with animals, with any being. You're wired to survive. Even the ego is an important survival tool. Without the ego, like, the people talk about killing the ego, you wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't know which mouth hole to put the food in. Like, you need the ego. As long as you're alive, you're going to have an ego. I consider it like a roommate, if you will, but it's a matter of seeing it for what it is, as that kind of helpful tool that allows me to navigate the world,
mhm,
not as a master. There's a saying that the ego makes a wonderful servant, but a terrible master.
mhm.
And this is a case of thinking that we can institute beings in machines is a case of the ego gone amok and becoming a master and leading us astray. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I
I
don't
was
know.
just
That
trying to
might be
think.
enough if I just, like, if I didn't tear down the the physicalist and there's enough. I don't know. I think I basically went out. Do you have anything else that on this topic that you think we should cover?
Not on this topic specifically. I was just trying to think about what our next episode should be about. We were talking about something a couple days ago.
Yeah, I think
Um
it should be it's funny you say that, now my mind goes blank too. There was a really good one that we had where, it definitely had, like, it was some type of slight disagreement between you. Oh, I think it was
yeah.
something to do with the merger of science and spirituality, like,
Oh, that's
and
right.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Does it make sense to say that there is a science of consciousness?
Yeah, or
And
how
if
how
people
much.
do say that,
Oh, the
should
strategy we should
mhm,
use, like, because
mhm,
there's this question. I always push back. So, and we'll cover this in the next episode. So just this, I think, will be the next episode, so you guys can comment your thoughts on it. But Alex and I do have a little disagreement about strategy, where I am a very, very hard stickler for not conflating um, science and other investigative methods, particularly spiritual practice or looking introspection, contemplation, meditation. I'm very much not wanting that get pulled into the science umbrella for two reasons. One, to protect science from putting things into the method that the method is not competent in, and then two, to not let this narrative we have in our culture, which is that science is the only way to answer every question, become true or become, like, thought of that way. I think it collapses something that's important to recognize the distinction between. So,
yeah,
and but then there's this question of strategically, if you're going to tell people, you know what we need to do to decode the actual nature of reality is we need to engage in spiritual practice. You get, yeah, okay, get off my doorstep, don't go sell crazy somewhere else, and that I understand, right?
yeah. Well, and then there's an even different question of, like, I mean, is it a waste of time to expect the world to conform to the way you think things should be? It's not just you, right? There's obviously other people that share that sentiment. I'm not picking on you.
Mhm.
But is it realistic to expect the world to progress in that way?
Yeah.
I don't
So
think
it's a
so,
matter
dude.
of strategy here.
Yeah.
Is like, all right, you can be a purist if you want, but if you want anybody to listen to you, we have to
Yeah.
play science. And look, this paper that we really love and I think is a wonderful step in the right direction is put out sort of almost like it's a scientific paper, even though it's essentially a metaphysical essay.
Mhm.
And that's a nod to, hey, take us seriously because we're doing science here. And I don't know. It's a double-edged sword for me. I tend to come down on the side of not conflating the two because I think it leads to this a conclusion that is scientism, that is like science
Mhm.
is the only way to have any answers on anything. So we will
Mhm.
discuss this one next time. But that's That I think that's a really important strategic thing to think about. Hey, to the extent that we think reality is the way it is, how do we communicate this in a way that would actually move people to question or to do
Yeah.
whatever?
And I mean, for me, it's all about building bridges. I want to see this conversation be discussed on the biggest stages.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that if we have completely, if we're not willing to give in certain areas. But let's save that conversation for the next episode. Hopefully,
Absolutely.
people will subscribe and tune in for the next one. But other than that, I think we're good here.
Peace.
Later.
Later.
Goodbye, everybody. Love
See ya.
you.